An ominous cloud looms over Planet Express. A series of planets have recently wound up destroyed, one by one, and when the professor examines the pattern, it becomes clear that the Earth is next. Leela, for one, cannot dwell on this thought for long, as something starts to agitate her pet alien Nibbler, who runs away. As Leela tracks him into an alley, she finds herself attacked by strange flying brains. Nibbler, now donning an odd military uniform, appears in a miniature spaceship and saves her. The pair depart Earth, and Leela finds that suddenly she can understand Nibbler speak. He explains that he is actually a soldier from an ancient race as old as the universe itself, and that he was positioned on Earth as an observer, watching the human race in secret. He further shares that their destination is his home planet, Eternium, located at the precise center of the universe. The following morning, Fry awakens back on Earth to find that everyone except him has somehow had their intelligence significantly reduced. He is at first entertained, but quickly grows frustrated being surrounded by people dumber than even himself. Frustration turns to horror as compounding human error causes mounting devastation around the world. If this continues, before long the human race will destroy itself. Meanwhile, Leela and Nibbler arrive at Eternium, and in the Hall of Forever they are welcomed by the Nebalonian Council. They inform Leela of what has happened. Their most ancient enemy, the Brain Spawn, have attacked the Earth. The thoughts of other beings cause agony for the Brain Spawn, and so they seek to wipe out all intelligent life in the universe. The Nebalonians have opposed them since the beginning of time, but are helpless in the face of the Brain Spawn's intelligence-draining powers. However, there is one hope, Fry, who for some reason lacks a Delta brainwave, rendering him immune to the Brain Spawn's attack. If he can defeat the Brain Spawn's leader, the Earth will be saved. And so, a plan is hatched. While Nebalonians distract the Brain Spawn, Leela will deliver this message to Fry. Unfortunately, when Leela returns to Earth, she also falls prey to the brain-draining field and is left too stupid to function normally. She retains only enough of her mind to deliver her message to Fry, who reasons that the most natural place for a giant brain to go must be a library. His deduction is correct, and the two of them soon confront the big brain in the classic literature section of the New York Public Library. Fry quickly realizes that his thinking hurts the big brain, so he grabs a book off the shelf and begins to read. In retaliation, the big brain uses its telekinesis to pull Fry and Leela inside the world of classic novels, aiming to trap them there forever. But against all odds, Fry manages to escape and trick the big brain into trapping itself in a story he wrote. And just like in Fry's story, the big brain leaves Earth, killing all of the other brain spawn left behind and ending their brain-draining attack. The Earth is saved, but alas, the after effects of the brain spawn's power cause everyone to forget what happened, and none of them believe Fry when he tells them. Meanwhile, Nibbler returns to posing as Leela's pet, remaining ever watchful in case the brain spawn should ever return someday. Welcome to Space Podcast 3000, where the future is in the past.
Man, this episode.
It's wild.
Just right from the opening gag. 80% comedy by volume, or 80% entertainment by volume.
I mean, that's a pretty good ratio for, any show.
Yeah, I like my entertainment to be at least 150 proof.
So anyway, I really like this one background gag at the pet show in the opening scene. Where the logo is a dog's head over a recycle symbol, and the label is Soylent Chow.
Oh no.
Yeah. That's such a subtle joke, but it's so good. The perfect kind of background joke.
You know it.
That's where a lot of the background gags come into play, because they have so many just really obscure reference, not even necessarily really obscure, but just really clever uses of somewhat obscure lore.
And then, of course, this scene is also the introduction of the Hypnotoad.
Yeah, the Hypnotoad is fucking terrifying, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, the Hypnotoad became kind of a meme for a while.
Absolutely.
So supposedly the loud noise for its hypnotism was just meant to be a placeholder, but they ended up keeping it because it just sounded so wrong.
It does sound wrong. It's horrifying.
It really is. And of course, this episode also introduces the brain spawn and the Nebalonians, and the brain spawn are also terrifying.
I don't want to be stupid.
And the Nebalonians are adorable, even though they don't want to be.
Although the plot of this episode of planets being destroyed in a straight line is, you're going to be shocked by this, it's another Star Trek reference.
Of course it is.
I think the episode was called Operation Annihilate, or it could be Operation Annihilation.
Something along those lines.
But yeah, it was a similar episode of like this plague destroying planets in a straight line. Like that's literally a Star Trek episode.
It just seems so silly destroying planets in a straight line.
Well, if you're trying to be efficient, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't remember what the context was in the episode of Star Trek, why it was a straight line, but I like it here because, yeah, it is the kind of thing where it's so ridiculous you'd think it's just the joke, but it's also that Star Trek reference. I don't know. I like that.
I just want to know how they ended up in a straight line. I'm sure there's tons of other planets along the way, but no, just gotta go straight. The brains aren't as clever as they think they are.
I mean, I think maybe they were making a beeline for Earth because Fry is there, except no, they don't know about him in this episode, so
yeah,
never
it makes
mind.
him his lack of a delta wave makes him invisible to them, essentially. Invisible and immune.
Maybe delta waves travel straight?
I don't know.
I think it could be the fact that they're supposed to be sort of presented as a force of nature, so that they are just like if it were like a death cloud approaching a thing, it would be traveling in like a straight line because it has no autonomy to change its trajectory.
Maybe.
I suppose.
And then the effect once they arrive of just draining intelligence is, as I said, that is genuinely horrifying.
I don't want to be stupid.
Yeah.
I'm stupid enough.
And their motivation actually makes sense in terms of just like if they're trying to keep their own race to survive, if they see conscious thought as pain, then yeah, this would be self-preservation for them. They're trying to their motivation actually makes sense. It's actually you don't agree with it, but you understand it.
Well, that's part of what makes it so terrifying, but also just the fact that for me personally, especially when I was dealing with, gender dysphoria, for a long time, I would often say that the only part about myself that I don't actively dislike is my mind. And, I feel better about myself now, a little bit, but, that's still the idea of losing my brain and essentially, who I am in that sense is, my greatest nightmare, and always has been.
Yeah, it would be scary losing one's sense of self. Even if you don't really have much of a sense of self, it's still part of who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really we talk about it as a really heavy episode, but it's a pretty brisk watch too. It's there's a lot of really good humor in it, and this easily ranks up with their similar to the other ones we've seen this season. This ranks up there as one of the best of the series.
Oh yeah, some fantastic jokes. Once the brain spawn get there, there's some amazing humor in just seeing the stupidity. Zoidberg just saying, Zoidberg won't go outside, and Fred's just I just let you back in. I think every dog owner can relate to that.
Dog owner, cat owner,
yeah, cats
owner.
are like that too.
I didn't think many people had, indoor-outdoor cats.
You'd be surprised, but it's not just indoor-outdoor, it's within this room. I just let you out of this room, and now you want back in this room.
Yeah, exactly. They want to go out. They want to go into the bedroom, or they wanted to go into the bathroom, or they want to go somewhere else.
I can't keep the bathroom door all the way closed because Marm will just want in and out. Sir, please just let me pee.
He loves you. He wants to be with you.
I know, but it's annoying.
That's your rum-tum tugger.
Hey.
He's always on the wrong side of doors.
I got that one. Rum-tum tugger, he's a curious cat.
But yeah, that with my family's dogs when I was growing up, that's why we learned very early on to leave the doors inside the house from room to room open. whenever we didn't need them closed, just to let the dogs in and out. Like, even sleeping at night, we would leave our bedroom doors open so the dogs can go from our beds to, like, their food bowls if they need to or whatever. Just one of those things. But, like, letting them indoors and outdoors and just being like, come on, I just let you in. And you already want to go back out. That's it's annoying, but it's a relatable joke.
Well, part of the joke is the fact that Fry is not taken aback by it. Part of the joke is that, he's already done this before. It's like, because this seems like the kind of thing that Zoidberg would just be saying randomly, but no, he's said this before, and Fry has kowtowed to him. Fry has indulged him before.
And then you have Leela's conversation with Nibbler on their way to his home planet, where she's like, so the meaning of existence is, so every religion is wrong. And, like, we don't even hear what Nibbler's said because it's just gibberish to us. And I don't care how cliche it is, but I love this type of gag where you have a character asking some major, like, earth-shattering questions and you don't get to hear the response because either they're talking in a language only that character can understand or they're drowned out by noise.
Yeah.
Like, I think Jimmy Neutron, the cartoon, the show, had a really good example of this, where a character actually asks, like, hey, how come we don't need helmets to breathe in space? Because, just the stylistic choice for the cartoon. And he gives an answer, but we don't hear it because it's drowned out by another character singing over it.
Yeah, I think Carl's the one singing.
Probably, but I haven't seen the show in God forever,
yeah,
but I remember that joke.
I think I saw that clip somewhat recently.
I remember that joke because it was such a good gag. And, like, again, I don't care how cliche it is, but this type of joke always gets me.
It's a good joke. I mean, I like the idea. The one thing that I don't like about that scene is the fact that she's basically repeating what he's saying specifically for the audience.
Well, it's kind of a necessity.
I mean, you have to accept that it has to kind of be done for exposition. It's like, so what you're saying is blah, 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 blah. Oh, so what you're saying is, it's like, there could be a better way of phrasing that. It's like, I get that that's part of the joke, that they're trying to explain this for the audience, but then they drop the joke and then they go into so that's why that happens, and they don't even say anything like that. I feel like that could have been handled a bit better, like the way that she explains it without having to repeat exactly what he says. I don't know. I feel like there could have been a better way of doing that. You could you could reiterate what he says without just straight up repeating it.
Maybe. It is a little bit clunky, but, given what they were doing in that scene, it makes sense they would do it that way. And it's a short scene, so I don't think it's that big a problem.
I didn't mind it too much. It's just that's a cliche that I've always noticed in a lot of these things. Is like, you could be a bit better with that. It's like, because like when I was doing, because I noticed that sort of thing when I was writing for Video Game Bunker, and I specifically avoided doing that sort of thing with Commander Odo. So it's like you would get a response from him, but it would be silent, and you just like the way that I respond to it, you would sort of understand what he said from there. Without having to say, oh, so what you're saying is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I get it. Personally, I don't think it's as offensive as a character giving exposition, being like, as you know.
Oh, yeah. Like, nobody ever says, as you know. Unless it's, like, literally in a classroom setting or something. But even then, they wouldn't say, as you know. Or it's like, as you might know, or as you may be aware. As some of you already know, but others of you aren't, or as the audience doesn't know, so that's why I'm explaining here.
Or I guess sometimes in like a meeting they can do that sort of thing, just to make sure everyone's on the same page at the starting point, but it is very annoying, especially since most stories, when they do that, it's never handled gracefully.
And even if you would just take that line out, just like take as you know out of the start of the sentence and just go into the explanation, that would probably be a lot less clunky.
Probably. Although, on the subject of jokes in this episode, there's one joke that I'm not sure how I feel about it. And it's where they're talking about, like, where Fry figures out they're all idiots by them talking about, like, let's buy internet stocks on margin. And he's like, you guys are idiots. And then they're all like, let's all join a reform party. I'm not sure
how reform party.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that particular punchline. Because it feels very... it feels very status quo centrist-y. Like, I get most reform parties and, like, third parties in general, at least, especially in the United States, are just nonsense. Like, you get all these single-issue organizations, but
just the most obvious Reform Party punchline is Ross Perot. That is, like, the most cognizant representative of the Reform Party that most people know.
Or, like, you could always make, like, a Green Party joke. I don't know, man. But, like, the way it's done here is just, I don't know how I feel about it. Like, it's funny, it's just, I don't like what it says about the writers.
They could have done pretty much any joke in that situation, because, like, I mean, I don't know if it says so much about the writers or the writers reflecting the sensibilities of the time, because that's the part, one of the hard parts about being a comedy writer, is, like, I'm not necessarily saying this, it's just, this is a commentary on the world. This is not necessarily my thoughts on the situation. These are the reflection of what the world's thoughts on the situation are. It's a very, very difficult tightrope to walk as a comedy writer.
Well, I think as a comedian, if you're just regurgitating people's opinions back at them and not challenging them in any way, you're not really doing your job necessarily.
It's a very tough tightrope to walk, because you want to be able to make a joke that people will both expect and also gets them off guard. So they couldn't just necessarily say, let's join the Republican Party or something like that. That seems like it would be too obvious or too pointed in one direction.
I don't know, man. You know what I mean. Let's move on. I really like the Nebalonian Council. Largely because they bear a striking resemblance to the Grey Council of the Minbari in Babylon 5.
Of course they do.
Like, the cloaks, the set design with the lighting, it's pretty much exact. I think there's even, like, the same number of members, because I think I counted 9 of them. And if anyone listening to this hasn't seen Babylon 5, watch Babylon 5. It was really extremely good.
I'll go dig out the DVDs.
Oh, you have it on DVD?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do.
Very nice, because those are out of print and not the easiest thing to find now. I wish I had it on DVD, especially since it's not on Prime Video anymore.
One thing that I noticed about the Nebalonians, and this seemed to be consistent actually, when the 3 are sitting in a line, 2 of them have their buttons on the one side, then one of them has them on the other. And generally, that's a thing for, like, women's clothes have the buttons on the other side, men's clothes have them on the other. But the female Nebalonian in the middle had it in the same direction as the one sitting next to her. And then there was the one on the right that had it going the opposite direction. Which was, I don't know, but you'd think that it was just kind of like a continuity error, but it was consistent every time they showed the 3 sitting there. So there was obviously some continuity going on there.
Maybe the one sitting next to her is also a girl. Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe it's some other status thing.
Could be.
Possibly, because she had a different color suit as well. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's just like the fact that it was consistent between shots and that it was specifically different.
It's an interesting observation.
Probably just a way to make it more unique.
Possibly.
Maybe. And actually another joke that I really liked was in the scene with the Nebalonians and the council, where the one counselor is like, Earth, home of the pizza bagel.
Yes. I haven't had pizza bagels in forever.
That is our intergalactic legacy, the pizza bagel.
I mean, yeah, I would agree that's probably in our top 5 inventions ever.
What about pierogies?
That's also in the top 5.
And if we're being serious about this, what would you say is, like, our greatest inventions on Earth? Because I think the internet would be up there.
That's probably number 1, yeah.
Space travel, like the International Space Station, the space program in general.
I don't know. I think culinary inventions, definitely.
The sewer system, just because it is such an extremely complicated, massive thing, and actually building it was such a massive undertaking. Like, there's actually a city, I don't remember which, where they literally raised the elevation of the entire city by a couple of feet so that they could install the sewers.
Wow.
They straight up grabbed all of the buildings and the grounds and raised the elevation. And that is just a massive undertaking. And especially given like how much of an impact this has had on sanitation, and just you can't even overstate how much of a positive impact it's had on people's quality of life and expectation, and arguably even like lifespan, just because of the improved hygiene of having underground sewer networks rather than everyone just dumping their refuse
in the streets, dumping in the gutters.
So like that is easily top 5, just from its sheer importance and scale. God, what else? Probably the combustion engine, or like electricity in general.
Antibiotics.
That's a big one.
Yeah, medicine.
Science rules, man.
Yeah, science is great.
Science is fascinating. Ugh, the sun is in my eyes now.
Oh, stupid sun.
It's just getting to that time.
Yeah. So this episode is also where we're introduced to Fry lacking a delta brainwave and his resulting immunity to the brain spawn's power. And of course we'll learn the reason for this mutation, I think, later this season, and it'll be important again next season when he fully realizes his destiny.
Yeah, this was a good episode, but it's also a very important episode in the grand scheme of the whole series.
Yeah, it's very plot heavy, which I like plot heavy episodes.
Oh yeah.
But that's just my personal taste. I know some people are more into comedy. But this still, of course, has great comedy.
Yeah, the comedy in this is great. Just the fact that the Nebalonians hate how cute they are, and then still just kind of completely leaning into it, where like Leela's just kind of playing with them and scratching their chin, and they're just like enjoying it.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the sitcom having a very serious, plot-heavy episode. Like, I think one of the best episodes of the One Day at a Time reboot is Not Yet, the episode where it's literally just the entire family at the grandmother's bedside as she might be dying. And it's a very dramatic episode with much more downbeat humor, and it's, like I said, in my opinion, one of the best episodes of the show. So you can very much do this in a comedy. The jokes just still need to be there, and in this episode they definitely are. And it helps that the plot is really interesting, that this terrifying concept of the brain spawn, and Fry needing to fight them, and Leela discovering the truth about Nibbler. And I think I heard in one of the episode commentaries that they had always intended for there to be a greater meaning behind Fry ending up in the future. And
they just weren't sure what.
Yeah. And I appreciate that they're very much taking their time building it up, where, we get this here in season 3, the Delta Brainwave thing, and then later in the season we learn why, and then that finally comes to a head in season 4. I think that's really cool that they were willing to be that patient.
Yeah, it's really nice when, certain things are spread out, not, like, all at once in your face.
Yeah, don't just front load your entire plot and then have the rest be pure comedy. You gotta pace yourself if you want to do this.
Well, it's also the fact that they did show restraint in holding it off, but also the fact that they gave themselves options. Like, if you look at this sort of stuff in the early seasons of The Simpsons, they had ideas and things that never went anywhere. They had the idea of Marge having bunny ears hidden under her hair. They had the idea of Homer and Krusty being the same person. And they never ended up doing anything with it. But when you're writing a show like this, then you want to give yourself options for what you do in the future. It's like, okay, well, maybe I can do this, or maybe I can do that, or maybe I can just drop it completely, or maybe you got a motorcycle going by outside your window that screws up what you're talking about. And you also, one interesting thing that I saw when they were writing Beast Wars, the Transformers follow-up, when they were doing it, they weren't sure if the show itself was going to be set in the past or the future or on some other planet. So what they did was they gave themselves options. They put themselves on a planet with 2 moons. So they say, well, if they decide later on that this is Earth, we'll just destroy one of the moons.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah. And it's a great way of looking at it as just a story writer for these sort of things. Because also, of course, sometimes things change in production. Sometimes you can't do one of the original plans, like an actor leaves, or like mandate from broadcast standards and practices that said you can't do something. It's good to have extra options. So that's the kind of thing that you really need to take into account when you are writing for television, or even just writing for like a website or something that you would even have creative control over. Even if things change in the future, it's good to have options.
Well, funny that you mentioned that, especially compensating for actors leaving, because that was one of the huge things that really defined Babylon 5, which I mentioned earlier, where the whole show was like its whole story was planned out exhaustively from the very beginning. Like from day one, from the pilot, they knew exactly where they were going with it, or at least the creator and showrunner did. And to make sure that they could stay on track no matter what happened, they actually had planned out what they called trap doors, basically ways that in case an actor decided to leave, where they could just have an episode and write them out and replace them and justify it within the narrative and still continue on with the plans that they had. And they ended up needing to do this several times over the course of the show, including with the lead between seasons 1 and 2.
That is really cool.
Wow.
The fact that they planned all this stuff out, that is so cool.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
There are a couple of subplots that end up not really going anywhere because of it, like Talia, the telepath in the cast, who because they had to write her out and replace her, and they actually brought back the character from the pilot that she had replaced, which was really neat. But as a result, there's a couple of little episodes, like one where her telepathic abilities get boosted, and another one where there's this whole subplot of her working with Ambassador Kosh. And that latter one was setting up bringing her back after her character gets written off later. But because the actress decided not to come back after all, that latter episode ended up going nowhere. So it doesn't work out perfectly, but the fact that it works out as well as it does in that show is just really impressive and speaks very well to, the need to be adaptable in this sort of thing, so you don't need to rewrite your entire story to account for, say, your lead actor having a drug problem and needing to go into rehab.
It's really amazing how people write things out, the different ways.
And then, of course, there's certain
plan.
things that develop just because the writers thought, hey, that would be interesting. Like, another example from The Simpsons. We're talking more about Simpsons than Futurama, but there we go. But, like, another example from The Simpsons is that they didn't decide until later that Chief Wiggum and Ralph would be related. The characters were developed independently, and then later on, it's like, yeah, let's make it father and son.
Huh. It's funny because they're so alike that you would think it was planned from the beginning.
Right? So that's why stuff like that is kind of surprising, that this seems like it would be good, or even things that seem like it would be planned from the beginning but weren't, but they did such a good job of integrating it to make it seem like it had been planned from the start.
I mean, it is definitely worth having a plan rather than just making everything up as you go along. But
also, it helps to be malleable. If you need to change your plan, then sometimes that happens, which is why it can be a good idea to have multiple plans, at least early. Even if they're not fully formed, at least then you have an idea of what you might do.
Yeah, you don't want to end up like How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
I should probably explain for context for that. So the whole framing device of that show was the main character in the future telling the story to his kids. But because the actors playing the kids were, aging, they were like, well, crap, we can't just, keep recording with them as the show goes on, because that'll strain credibility, because it'll just be him sitting them on the couch with them for years and years. That won't make sense. So they had to record, like, literally the end of the show, at least the segments with the kids, during, like, I think season 2. And then the problem with that is that now they were locked into the ending they had planned early on, and then when the characters over the remaining seasons ended up developing in very different directions, and then they had to go to that original plan ending at the end of the season, at the end of the series, it felt very forced because this isn't who the characters were anymore. So you do need to, have backup plans or keep things flexible. You can't...
Or, in a case like that, be willing to end the series early but that sucked because the series was doing very well. It was very well received. They couldn't just end it.
And there was some really good stuff in the later seasons. They could have come up with other ways to end the show. You didn't need to necessarily have the kids on screen, especially since their role was very much minimized.
It was just a framing device.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't need to have them on screen in the ending. And in fact, there is an alternate ending on the DVD that doesn't show them at all. And it's not as satisfying an ending. It just, cuts out the entire last bit of the episode. But, there are other options.
And you also have to be willing to, something that, feels kind of recent, especially with the invention of the internet. Recently, there's been shows and movies that will completely rewrite what their plans are just because people figure out what way that the story is going, and that you shouldn't do that. If people have figured out your plot, that's a good thing. It means your story makes sense.
Yeah, didn't that happen with Game of Thrones?
Yes, that is the one example I'm thinking of, but also Marvel.
I think one really notable example, I think the first time I encountered this was Mass Effect 3, where the script leaked, and in response to this, the head writer and I think one other guy basically locked themselves in his office and completely rewrote the ending just out of their asses with not a whole lot of time left. And, anyone who was into video games at the time probably remembers what a shit show and how controversial that ending was.
Yeah, I think I've heard about it.
I was not aware that they had changed the ending. I thought people were pissed off at the ending because that was what they were leading up to. It was no, this was not what they were leading up to at all. Everything you played for the 3 games leading up to this point, everything that was foreshadowed, all the themes that were brought in, threw them out the window because we're writing this story right out of our ass.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that would piss me off too. Especially if they did it because people guessed what was going to happen or the script leaked. It's that shouldn't matter. If you're trying to tell a good story, if you're trying to do these things, the twist should not be the only reason that the ending is satisfying.
Well, the thing that was especially controversial about the ending of Mass Effect 3 was that your choices ultimately didn't matter, because this whole series had built itself on the idea that your decisions shape the narrative and change the way things go. And while the basic structure of the plot was always the same, the main story beats would always remain the same no matter what you did, there were all these little details and callbacks and recurring characters that would change depending on what you did. Even the ending of Mass Effect 2, any of the characters who died in the final mission would still be dead in 3. But then, suddenly at the very ending of 3, it was basically all of your choices suddenly don't amount to anything, and it's just okay, now you have 3 buttons, and what color explosion do you want?
Yeah, and the same thing happened in Deus Ex. You literally have a choice of 3 different buttons. But one of them is around a corner.
Well, say what you will about the ending of Deus Ex, at least you got a different ending depending on which button you pushed. In the original ending of Mass Effect 3, the ensuing cinematic cutscene was virtually identical for all 3 choices.
Ugh.
Yeah, when people joked at the time that it's what flavor explosion do you want? That was hardly an exaggeration, because the most noticeable difference between the 3 versions of the ending was just the color of the explosion. Thankfully, it's not now, it's a controversy that people don't remember as much today, because after this, they did, in the following months, release a free DLC that added more to the ending and expanded on them and helped differentiate the 3 of them.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and it definitely is a lot better. And now, I think if that was the way that the ending had been when it originally released, it wouldn't have been nearly as controversial. But it did still have the issue of suddenly pulling all of this new stuff out of their ass in the last few minutes and contradicting established ideas and themes. It just would have been at least more satisfying narratively. I mean, personally, my hot take is that the story of Mass Effect started falling apart during Mass Effect 2, as opposed to the common consensus, which seems to be that it was perfectly fine up until the end of 3, but, I mean, I disagree. But that's just me.
Well, my hot take is I have tried on like 4 separate occasions to get through Mass Effect, and I just can't.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really enjoy the first game. I thought it was pretty good, but it's definitely for a specific type of player. Anyway, we should get back to Futurama.
We don't really have too much else to say other than this is a very, very good episode.
I mean, I have a couple other things to bring up that I wanted to came out of my notes.
Sure.
So I really like this one background gag in the library where they're running through the hallway and the doors in the background are like reference books on tapeworm, and then Stephen King, A to Aardvark.
He wrote that many stories that he has an entire wing devoted to just those.
Well, I mean, given how prolific he is, in 1,000 years he may indeed have written enough books for that.
Assuming he's still alive as a head and still writing, I guess. I guess he would have ghostwriters. Doesn't Tom Clancy have a shit ton of ghostwriters too?
Yeah, his name is still being used even though he's been dead for years. But like Stephen King, if he's kept alive as a head, I can't imagine he would stop writing. He's the kind of person who there's no way he would ever stop writing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, doesn't he write like 10,000 words a day or something?
Something like that. Like, this is a dude who
crazy.
Literally early in his career, his publisher insisted that a few of his books be published under a pseudonym because he was just cranking out so many novels, and the publisher was afraid that if he got too many books out in the same year, people would think that maybe he was rushing them and they weren't as high quality. But like, no, he just writes that much.
At least he doesn't have a writing sweatshop like James Patterson.
Ugh. I mean, I think if anyone else could pull off that degree of writing, it's probably Brandon Sanderson. He's not as well known as King, but he's a fantasy writer who's also extremely prolific. And in fact, he recently put out a video on YouTube talking about what he's been up to over the past 2 years. And the short version is he's gone so stir-crazy during the pandemic that in addition to his existing projects, in the space of just the 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic started, he also wrote an additional 4 full-length novels, plus a 5th novella for his kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, again, in 2 years, all on top of his existing projects.
That reminds me of a character I wrote in one of my novels, not last year's Nano, but the one before that. He was a guy who just... his entire life was writing. Well, he was a writer, but he was also like a forum moderator for like a kind of like DeviantArt, but not DeviantArt. And he would constantly write, and he actually challenged himself to write a novel a week.
Wow.
And he accomplished it, and he like published them all online. Not most of them were not very good. Most of them were first drafts, but he would like self-publish, and then like he would have like friends and everything, and they'd like occasionally buy them digitally. Like you buy them for $1, but if you have like 52 novels out there and a few hundred people buy them, that's a decent amount of income.
I mean, you have Chuck Tingle who releases
tons
of short stories.
Like part of Chuck Tingle's whole thing is the shock factor.
Well, I mean, okay, I have not.
Well, Chuck Tingle, and also who's that other guy? Carlton Melnick.
Okay, I'm gonna say I have not read Chuck Tingle, but there is a YouTuber I follow who did a whole video. Like, he's basically, I've read a few Chuck Tingle books, and I want to answer the question: is he actually a good writer? And the conclusion that he came to is, yeah, he's actually pretty decent. Like, I
should check out some of
his books. Like, if you're into those fetishes, they're probably the sort of thing you would enjoy. And
I mean,
that's
it's
really
got dinosaurs. That's good for me.
Yeah, like, you would wonder, given how prolific he is, if the writing's any good, but apparently it is. I don't know, man. Anyway, So in the library scene, I like how all of the classic and like modern 20th century books that come up in the episode's climax are inside a room labeled ancient literature.
Oh, I completely did not connect that. But that makes complete sense.
Well, in 1,000 years, you know?
Yeah,
It
Moby
is.
Dick will be ancient literature and a hefty, dense, symbolic tome.
Yeah, they go into like Moby Dick, Tom Sawyer, Pride and Prejudice. I love Jane Austen, so that I appreciate that.
You know, Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys were also in that room.
Oh yeah, like speaking of
Hardy
that,
Boys, too easy. Nancy Drew, too hard.
and then he's like perfect. Bonfire of the Vanities. Like, okay, how does that make sense? How is Nancy Drew too hard, but a satirical novel about racism and class divide is just right?
Again,
don't
that's just
know.
making jokes for joke's sake. It's just like the joke about joining the Reform Party. It's really, it's just a cheap shot.
No,
really.
I really like this joke. It's just makes me scratch my head. I think that's definitely the joke, but still.
I love the idea of him trapping the brain in his own book.
Yes.
He just kind of, it's
Yeah, I
almost
think
like
that's
something
really
out of
clever.
Inception or Nightmare on Elm Street, where you think you're out of the book, but you're still in the book.
That's what my dreams are like.
Speaking of which, everyone within the sound of my voice, pause the podcast, open up a new tab in your web browser, and go to www.noraisin.net. You will thank me.
No raison.
I mean, I also really like the line where the big brain is like, Dewey, you fool, your decimal system is played right into my hands. What
He has no
hands?
hands.
You're a giant floating
What
brain
hands?
without a body. What hands?
No, I'm glad they explained that robots also have delta waves, because at the beginning I'm like, but Bender
Yeah,
doesn't have a brain.
why else would Bender be getting dumb?
Also, some plants, apparently.
What plants are smart enough to... You know what? Never mind. That's the rabbit hole I don't want to go down.
Venus
Picture
flytraps?
plants.
I said that's a
Sundews.
rabbit hole I don't want to go down.
How about a pitcher plant? You can go down that hole.
Damn it.
Honeydew? Or not a sundew?
Sundew, yeah.
So did you notice that in Fry's book he writes Leela cried for her lost love? Interesting.
Well, you know.
Well, it's his own fan fiction of their life. He can write what he wants.
True.
You draw from real life and put it into the story.
Well, except it's the real Leela doing it, and his exact wording is that Leela cried for her lost love, and we see that she was crying over Fry specifically, which makes me wonder, like, because clearly her actions would have been needed to fill in the gaps, you know, her thoughts, so it just makes me think maybe she does already have some kind of subconscious feelings for him that she hasn't realized yet.
Maybe.
Well, given
would be
the
cool.
stance from Parasite's Lost, I think it's kind of obvious she does have feelings for him.
I also just really appreciate how Fry is just like, I did it all thanks to the books at my local library. It's
And it just holds there for an uncomfortable time.
it's so after school special. I love it. It's just so funny.
After school special, now for adults. After school.
I mean, I'm not going to complain about a message about, you know, telling people to read more books and to support their local libraries. Libraries are a vital resource for many communities.
Yeah. You know, I went to the library a lot when I was young.
Libraries are great. They're the last public space that does not want our wallets more than us.
You just need our tax dollars, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
There's public parks.
Well, it's just like, God, tax dollars go into public libraries for the public good. The whole concept of the public good has been so decayed over the past, you know, century by neoliberalism and conservatism that, like, just the idea of governments and tax dollars doing anything just for the good of the people with no expectation of a return, it's like, if libraries didn't have historical precedent and it was like this new concept that you were trying to get started now, it would never happen.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen that argued all the time. If somebody tried to start the library system today, it'd be criticized as a socialist plot.
Exactly. And just, you would never freaking see it. It would be like the whole, like, okay, how does that return? How does this benefit? Like, a better educated society is good for everyone.
Or you look at something like Wikipedia. Like, Wikipedia is completely community driven.
Yeah.
It capitalizes on the nerdish need to correct people.
The only reason Wikipedia is as good as it is that it's entirely funded by donations and they aren't a capitalist venture. If it was for profit, it would be worse.
Yeah, because like companies could sue to have things taken out of their articles or things like that.
Well, not even just that, but also stuff like, we constantly see all of these corporate buyouts. Like, as of this recording, a very recent one is Epic announcing that they're buying out Bandcamp. And we see this all the time, where you have a really good small company that provides some fantastic service, and it's the better option than anyone else. In this case, Bandcamp is really good for listeners because you get high-quality music. It's very easy, and the artists get like tons of the money. There's even days where the artists get all the money. So it's good for artists too. It's a good deal for everybody, and it works well. And so it gets really popular, and then some big corporation buys it out, and within a year, I'm predicting, maybe 2 years at most, they're going to start making it worse. Hell, we saw this happen with Humble when they got bought out, and then like a year later, they started fucking with it and making it worse.
Yeah.
You just need to wait for the next thing to happen, which is going to start being even harder to do because they're competing with themselves, and essentially. Support your local content creators, people.
Yeah.
Support your local anything, honestly. Shop small. Hulk shop small.
Shop smart. Shop smart.
Sorry, the small game shop.
If there's an independent creator or business you like, support them whenever you can. They need it. Anyway, for now, I guess we'll just leave you off with, now we will leave Earth for no reason.
Yes, we end this podcast for no reason. Thank you for listening to Space Podcast 3000. Your three voices of the future are Noah Altman, Doug Hancox, and Eden Valerie. The theme music is Voxel Revolution by Kevin MacLeod. You can support the show and listen to new episodes a full week early at patreon.com/spacepod3k. Follow us on Twitter at spacepod3k. Be sure to join us next time as the Planet Express crew go Hollywood in That's Lobstertainment.